Welcome, all of you, to the 2020 iCAAD series of interview. Today, I have the great pleasure and honor to welcome on our iCAAD channels Judy Crane. A very warm welcome to you, Judy.
Thank you, Christophe. Happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Welcome to London. iCAAD is a platform dedicated to exchanging ideas, expanding knowledge on the prevention and treatment of behavioral, mental, and emotional health. Our next big platform is organizing flagship event in May, the 4th, the 5th and the 6th, 2020 in London. If you want to know more about it, go on our website, that is www.icaad.com and know everything about it. So, Judy, you are coming to iCAAD, and which is a great pleasure, and it's been many years that we've been together there, and we had the pleasure and the privilege to be with you. This very iCAAD, you are running a masterclass and a workshop for one day, and it's on trauma, because you're a trauma specialist, and the title is very intriguing. We'll come back to that. It is the purpose of purpose, the meaning of meaning, and generational trauma. So we'll get into the meaning of that. Before that, Judy, I think I owe to our audience today to give a bit of insight about who you are. You've got 30 years of experience in the field as a trauma healer, trauma therapist, architect of trauma therapeutic model. You are, how can I say that? You're in between the soul healer, the witchcraft, and the special ops. I mean, people may be intrigued by that, but actually we trauma therapists, we're a bit of that, I think. And you wrote a famous book, The Trauma Heart, and I could not more recommend people to read it. It's so warm, so not only as a clinician, I mean, as a human being, you get a lot from that. So it's a moment of pure beauty for the soul, I think. And you've been training thousands of therapists in the US and in the world, and this is what's happening at iCAAD. And last but not least, you are also the co-founder and CEO of the guest house Ocala in Florida, where obviously you treat people with massive pain from trauma to addiction, from addiction to trauma, and with that reverberation. And I believe you're one of the last hope for people in big pain, and it's so admirable to do that. So, having said all that, I have a question for you, Judy. What brought you into this hardcore work of trying to get into the more profoundest pain and fear of human beings called trauma?
I think the most important thing that gave me any kind of direction was that I was a very wounded human being for a very long time, not understanding at all why I was so immersed in my chemical dependency. Every single drug that was available in any form I used, and I certainly didn't understand why I couldn't stop, and that was really a painful thing, because as a little girl, my goal was to be a good human being, and clearly in my addiction, I was anything but a good human being, and it was that journey of trying to unravel why I couldn't get sober, what was preventing that, because I definitely tried over and over and over again, but it was that piece, and then once that miracle happened for me, and it's absolutely miraculous that it could happen. I was 42 years old, and if anybody looked at my life, they'd say, well, nothing was different. It was still the same insanity. You were doing the same horrendous things. What was different? And I think there were just a series of things that came along that gave me a different direction. And one of them was finally facing the secrets of my life. Finally finding someone who encouraged me to be able to share a bit of that, because I had been relapsing around the secrets for a very long time. And but then, like so many of us in this field, I got sober and somehow was enamored of the work. And what sponsor would say is you must give it back. And what better way to give it back than to try and help someone else to get sober. And it started that way. But just watching people who were doing exactly what I did, which was chronically relapse, create more turmoil and insanity. And it was over and over and over again we would relapse. And I watched these folks relapse. But I started to, because I was sober, I could see things a little differently. And I started to see a pattern. And the pattern was that there were causes and conditions that were painful that made it an imperative to use. Because, and I tell people this all the time, the reality is that when we are overwhelmed with the kind of pain that most of us have as a result of trauma, of really early childhood trauma in most conditions, is that we can go crazy, and I certainly spend time in a psych ward. We can attempt or commit suicide, and unfortunately I know way too many people who have done that. Or we can relapse, and relapse is the sanest option. And and as I came to that conclusion, recognizing that relapse was the sanest option, the capacity to help someone look at that in that way began to take away the guilt, the shame, and the remorse that most people feel around relapse. And it provided an opportunity to go to the underlying cause. Okay, so what is it that keeps creating this relapse? What happens each time that you have to use to assuage the pain? And that was where it started. And I just started to kind of unravel, okay, where do we go from here? And I have to tell you, I would go home at night with a client's situation on my mind, and I would pray before I went to bed, please help me to find an answer. And I would wake up the next morning and there would be an answer. An example is a young lady who, from a really, a family with a lot of resources, and she was in treatment probably 10 times, and she was only 21, and kept relapsing. And I didn't know what to do next. I really didn't know what to do next, because she would come to treatment, and she'd last for a little while, and then run out, be in relationship, and relapse again. And I prayed about it. And this sounds absolutely insane, but the next morning I went and pulled my group, it was a women's program, pulled my group together. I asked them to go get their pillows and their blankets and a stuffed animal. And I pulled out a book from our library called The Velveteen Rabbit. I had dreamt that assignment. It sounds so insane. But the assignment, I read that to them as though I were their mother. And then I asked them to go off and be alone for an hour and write about what came up for them. And for some people it was that their mother had never read to them. Mother wasn't available. For some it was that their mother had read to them, and there was great remorse and pain that they weren't with their mother because of their behaviors. There were just a series of things that happened. But for this young woman, it was one of those places where in it you understand that we are, it was being able to look at herself as the wounded velveteen rabbit with the fuzz, the fur rubbed off, but that she was still somebody good underneath. It truly, really happened for her. She came back and said, there may be hope for me, which was a very different thought for her. And with that work that she did that week was about telling me the secrets about sexual abuse that happened to her as a little girl, very little girl. And she she just started telling me everything about what had happened. And she was lesbian and was not able to share that with her family. They were just, all of a sudden, it wasn't just about the alcohol and the drugs. It wasn't about that at all. It was about the pain that she was carrying. And I was a young therapist, and it was like this miraculous thing. Nothing that I had created. It was just the environment for this to happen. And I think that if I could describe what it is that I love how you put black ops and some holistic magic that happens, and I think it's that because I can't even write a book and say this is how you do it.
No.
What I have to say is be open to the possibility that something's sitting in front of you, and if you can just make that happen in the moment, something else is going to happen. And as it's crazy, there's nothing logical about it. There's nothing that an intellectual can say, this is what you've done, this is how you did it. It's a matter of being able to open up somebody's spirit and let them be able to share with you where the pain is. Because otherwise we are going to continue to use and heal the pain. So I don't know if that answered the question.
It does. Thank you so much, Judy, here. There's something I want to come back on, or two things I picked up from you share. First of all, that I think our audience is going to realize very quickly that we have a lot of emotions when we're talking together, because we're talking about something which resonates into our own life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the moment where we co-create something. There's this emotional connection. No cognitive approach to that can help there. There's something more magical, as you say it. Let's go back to two things here, Judy. The first thing is relapse, or using, whatever we call that, is the least of the three options you named. Mental psychotic episode, taking your life away, or relapsing. In relapsing is a surviving mechanism. And I think it's important to reaffirm that, because people look at that as a relapse, as it's not a chronic disease, it's a chronic attempt to stay alive in that way.
Exactly.
It's controversial, but I think there's meaning to that.
Exactly. And thank you for saying that, because that, once I can help, and once you can help a client to understand that by relapsing they're saving their life, it shifts and changes everything about the paradigm of what relapse is about. Because it's all any human being is trying to do is to survive.
Yeah.
And we do it there are just so many ways that we find that are going to work in that moment. And generally, it's something we learn as a child that happens to be in place in that moment. A child that's been sexually abused and feels, for instance, that it feels good. Well, of course it does. Of course it does. Physically, it feels good. But the shame underneath of it, that child is bound and determined to find a sofa where they can rub themselves against the sofa. And there's the beginning of sex addiction as a result of a sexual trauma. Child is masturbating. And that becomes a coping mechanism. And it works in that moment, in that time. The same as sugar works, or alcohol, or self-harming behavior. And so, thank you, yes, for saying that. I think that once we can help people to remove the stigma of working really hard to save themselves in a very unorthodox, what looks to the rest of the world is very unorthodox, but it's in that moment, in that time, it's the most incredibly brilliant thing we can do in that time.
Yeah. Now, this requires to almost help people to save themselves from a very distant in the past and in space and time near-death experience, because something is important. Trauma is not about what happens, it's about that we are about to die.
Yes.
From fear, sadness, shrinking, sinking.
Yeah.
So near-death experience that is distant of 30 years, 20 years, we have to travel in time and space, sometimes in another place in the world where we grew up. Now, how do we hold the hand and walk with a client, with a patient, I prefer patient that time here, with a patient in that space-time travel, and that becomes magic, right? So just tell me more about the fantastic innovation and creation that you brought. I know there's no by the book, we know that.
Yeah.
However, there is this way to be siding with the memory of the patient, right? At a profound level.
And again, when I started doing this, incidentally, I had never read The Velveteen Rabbit, so that just came as a prayer and trusting that. But okay, so then being able to say to my client, to my patient, tell me what you need, and then extrapolating from that what comes next, because we know intuitively, we may not have a framework or a solid piece, but we know, and if we can say, tell me what you need, the rapport that builds in saying, I trust you to trust me, that part. The thing that I hear and have been hearing for 30 years over and over again is, you all never gave up on me. You never gave up. Even when I have had to discharge people, which I do rarely, we don't give up. We stay in touch. We make sure, how can I help you? Is there something else we can do? That not giving up is enormous. Not giving up, because they so often have been given up on, sent away again. Secondly, that our folks feel loved. And to help, I had a client say that recently, it doesn't make any sense to me. You all love me. You shouldn't be loving me. I have done these horrible things. I don't understand. And then when she finally understood, she said, I understand, it's the love of people. That you all really love people enough to stay and hold space. And it sounds innocuous. It sounds not even, almost like a fairy tale, okay? But isn't that what we need? The thing about trauma and addiction is that it's a wound of attachment. And we have framed the word dyadic attachment. And I think that's what we do as clinicians, as people in the field. And I don't care if they're the driver or the chef. They are there helping to create a dyadic, teaching how do I heal my relationship trauma? How do I learn how to be in relationship with another human being? Because if I can be in relationship, then I can heal this wound. Because the wound's one of an absence of love and connection.
I'm going to propose something here. We don't treat trauma. We co-create the healing with the client. And I think the way you describe the trust, it's not you client, you patient, I need you to trust me. It starts with I trust you to be a human being. And when your patient said, how is it that you love me? It remembers me of something you said. I think that was, we were in Istanbul a few months ago together, and you said this thing so profound. When a child is deprived from love, it's a matter of time he's going to start to hate himself. Yes. Yeah. And when we hate ourselves, it seems really bizarre that people can love us, right? Yes. So that's the beginning of the reattachment. And in creating that starts with trust. We have to trust our patients. They have to drive the car to some extent.
I was very blessed as a child, and I'm in my 70s now, so it's been a long time. But as a child, my family was very alcoholic, very dysfunctional, and I didn't have that connection. There's a whole story, my mother and I not connecting, and she connected with my sisters, and there's that absence of attachment. But I was about 5 years old, and in the U.S. It's kindergarten. And I was sick and home with tonsils, and I used to get sick a lot. And my kindergarten teacher sent me tea roses, a bouquet of tea roses. So as you were talking, I was thinking, how did I learn that? I learned it because somebody did it for me. What did I need? I needed somebody to say that I was valuable. And she did in that moment. So I think that those of us who do this work who do it well, as you do, I think we learned it before we ever went to school. I think it's an innate part of who we are. and that we're tapping into some talent, some gift that we already have. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does, Judy. Not long ago, I had this young woman, and I got her to access and embrace pre-verbal sexual abuse she went through. And the other day she said, "How did you know?" I said, do you want the clinical answer or the human answer? She said, "I want both." And I said, "Well, clinically, we tick boxes, symptoms, DSM. Okay, but that is not what mattered to me. I knew." And I cannot tell you why I knew, but I knew because of my own journey and my own story.
Right.
And she said, "Why?" And I disclosed a bit, and we started to bond. In as much when you just describe your family, a lot of alcohol, a lot of detachment, a lack of attachment. I went, "Oh, we could have the same parents." And immediately I went, "She's my sister."
Yeah.
Judy is my sister right now because we have the same background and the same quality of pain.
Yeah. And I think that quality of pain, if we're really fortunate, creates this empathy, and that just nurtures something innate in us. Did you want to be a good child, a good boy? Did you want to be loved by God and the world? And I think when that's who we are, like we're ripe for the next thing. So then, when addiction takes over in a huge way for me, and Christophe, I have a horrible history, insane, and when someone looks at it, it's like, oh my God, who was that human being? Who was that person? Then when you become that person in the midst of it, which so many of our people do, the guilt and the shame and the remorse is enormous because we are good people.
Yep.
And only good people feel shame and guilt and remorse.
That's right.
And so if I think that, and I can't say that I only hire people who have been there, but they sure make better employees if they've been there, if they've experienced that, because you can have a good heart and do this work and never have experienced it, but there's still something not quite there. People who've been wounded are the best teachers, I think.
Yeah, this I think the spiritual concept here, the shared pain creates the shared healing. I think it's Thomas Merton, the American theologian, who said that, and I think there's a great deal of truth here. And also I think it makes possible for us to stay as a helper, because we know how to process that trauma, that pain, that terror we went through. So we bear probably, if we worked on ourselves enough, we bear we deal with the secondary PTSD differently. Let me put it that way. I think we can take the shot and the shock, special ops again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We know how to process that, because I've seen a lot of my colleagues just being in shock after a session where awful things have been revealed inside the room, and not knowing really what to do, not with the fact but with the emotion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is very difficult. So this ties into your workshop at iCAAD, I think, because we discussed a bit before this interview about the way it is important now to transmit your wisdom and your knowledge, and there's no by the book, as you said, to help individual clinicians to be able to take the shot, to be able to help, to process, to hold their hands in the darkest place of humanity. So let's get into what is the day of Judy Crane at iCAAD, the workshop.
Well, let me start by saying, as an active addict, I was a mother who, when I was pregnant, 3 children, and I was using a different drug with each child and could not stop. I tell you that because my partner in crime at this event is my son. And if you're at that conference and if you hear us speak, he will undoubtedly use the joke he always does, which says, "And I'm Tom Pekka, and and Judy and I have worked together for 50 years. Ha ha ha! She's my mother." But he's been a therapist since he was 3 years old.
Yeah.
Because he was the child who was attempting to hold things together when insanity was breaking loose. So Tom and I have been doing these one-day workshops, and they're really, I think they're successful because he and I have done a lot of our own personal work together, so we have kind of a repartee, and we joke with one another, and once in a while he'll give me the American word is shot. He'll give me a shot for, do you remember when you drove us into the ditch, or something like that. But when we talked about this particular workshop, he came up with the title and the process because we had been talking about what it's like to be in this field for a long time, and how do we survive, why do we go in it to begin with, what are our expectations when we go in. I see who stays and I see who leaves or who can't do the work. And so what's the purpose of purpose and the meaning of meaning has everything to do with not just the work, but who we are as human beings and who we are as clinicians and people in the field. So I'm excited about that process.
Okay. So, Judy, the title, The Purpose of Purpose, The Meaning of Meaning, Transgenerational Trauma. Purpose, meaning, words profound to Viktor Frankl. And I remember he said together with Nietzsche, I think, and I think you wrote that somewhere, maybe in the abstract of your presentation. You know, when we got the answer to the why, the how becomes no longer a problem. And I reflected when I read your abstract on this idea that when we look at the behavioral health, we look at the behavior and we try to challenge and stop the behavior. But the behavior, to me, is a language for and of something. There is a why and a what it is about, why it matters, to the point that I stab myself with a knife, with a fork. And for me, someone self-harming, let's put it that way, is telling me a story.
Yes.
She deserves me to try to get her story right. Is this what it is about, this title? Purpose on purpose, meaning on meaning, generation trauma?
And underneath is exactly it, because invariably we are in this field because of our own intergenerational trauma. And that's where the why and the meaning often is. It tells the story of why the behavior, because it's not the behavior that we have to address. The behavior is the clue. What we have to address is why the behavior. So when I have someone who's self-harming, I have to give them the opportunity to tell me, when was the first time, what was happening, and what was the result of the self-harm in that moment that made it a tool for you.
At the beginning of it.
At the very beginning, because that's where it happens. I tell this story all the time about my mother and father, and it's funny, I've only ever told it on the stage. I've never told it to anybody in my family. It was a huge secret. But my mother and father, in the middle of a domestic argument, terrible argument, I was taking care of my sisters. I'm the oldest, that's my job. I was about 9, and they got quiet. I went downstairs. My father had his head in the oven, and I don't know how I knew at 9 that he was trying to kill himself, but I knew, and I pulled him out of the oven. He got up and he walked away. I don't know where he went. I don't know what he did that day. I never told anyone. But the first thing I did was go over to the kitchen counter and get a piece of white bread, American white bread, slather it with butter, and put sugar on top. And I had a sugar sandwich. And it raised my dopamine, my serotonin, and my oxytocin. And I got relief. And even though I didn't have the answers to where my father went or why, I got relief. And so that's the story of the behavior. And sugar's been an issue forever, along with a multitude of other things. But yes, and so that's the most important gift we can give a client. I have watched it over and over again, that when we help them to see the why, the puzzle pieces fall into place and they get relief, because what that says is, oh, I'm not a bad person, I'm not evil, there was a reason.
And this is so important here, because that sugar, toast, whatever, kept you alive, right?
It did.
And so we retain surviving mechanism. And then it obviously it's not the healthiest one, and it goes into more dramatic and catastrophic roads. Now, when we start to get the origin of all that, I believe, I felt when it happened to me, it was not an oven, but it was another story of the likes. And it was a tube of condensed milk. It was not a stove, but it's a very similar story. I felt safe.
Yeah.
Now, the day I realized that story, I could own my own story and breathe into that moment of, I know myself. You know what? The idea of having this tube of milk, and I'm speaking 30 years later right now, just dropped. The war was over.
Right.
The armistice was there. The peace was there. I need the closure to that war moment where my father was presenting very hectic alcoholic behaviors. And I felt safe. Now, things stay from childhood into adulthood. We probably contaminate or transmit that. And get me right, there's no genetic here. Huh? There might be epigenetic, there's no genetic. So it goes from one generation to another. And how those things are transmitted, I think the secret is a very good way to transmit things from one generation to another. That's what you believe. Keep things secret so they can perpetrate, right?
Yeah. I had the most extraordinary experience yesterday working with a family, a couple, and we've been working since August. Beautiful work, a husband and wife doing this beautiful work. And I had dinner with them and their children, and an 18-year-old daughter, a 15-year-old boy. And Mama's addiction had taken over, and they told the truth to their kids. They told the truth about why. They told the truth about what. They told the truth about where she was and what was going on. And then what I recognized was in this family, they were able to be open and honest with one another because they had made this decision 20 years ago when they met, when they got together, that they were not going to do what had been done in both of their families. That was one of the best experiences I've had in a long time, was watching a family be so absolutely authentic with one another, because it's not the norm. It's not the norm.
So trust, purpose, meaning are the way to break the cycles. So I think this is central because, again, we're not challenging belief here in core values, in core whatever.
Yeah.
We're just working with this basic humanity, right? I think we're born and we're on the earth to have a purpose and a meaning, or to bring a purpose and meaning, and to try to be authentic as much as we can. And we spend our life trying to hide and wear masks and hide things and hide ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think you just talked a bit about your story. 5 rehabs for me. Between the day I realized I had a problem and I could stabilize all that and start to embrace life happily, 12 years. And eventually the reason that it's changed, or why it changed, is because I addressed my childhood.
Right.
And it's not a very pleasant one, right? But I thought it was absolutely beautiful. So we're getting into two things here. You're going to propose at the workshop, I believe, 2 things. A way, and a very innovative, state-of-the-art way to help, embrace, address, love our patients, and help them to heal. That's one thing. But the second thing, and this is why I brought a bit of my life story here, is that I think every participant as a clinician is going also to be there as a human being. So the dual process that they're also going to experience something about themselves. And in the dual process is look inside, help people outside, right? So how is this working? It's experiential, basically, right? What you're proposing.
Yes. This work is, and I've said this before, trauma is visceral, sensory, cellular. So the healing process is the same way. It just is. And what's interesting, and I know that probably in your master's program, in my master's program, they told us that we weren't supposed to tell our story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You know what?
how unfortunate was that,
Yeah.
you know?
I lost a lot of time with that
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah, we have a revolution going on, to
Yeah.
quote Bernie. But
Yeah. Well, we cannot be nodding when people are sharing so much pain.
no,
We have to share our pain.
yeah,
This is what happened to me.
yeah. Because that's the gift you give to someone else. That's the Me Too.
That's the Me Too.
Yeah, it's the Me Too.
It is the Me Too, actually,
Uh-huh.
not because it's in fashion right now,
Mhm.
because of obvious atrocious reasons.
Mhm.
Me Too is the beginning of the empathy to the storytelling.
Mhm.
Not as in me,
No.
but I know the pain because I have the pain.
Right. Yeah.
Why are so people? I mean, it's a protective mechanism. I got it. So we make it a technology. We don't self-disclose, but actually it's because we have shame, right?
Mhm.
And we want to stay in power and in control.
Mhm.
No disrespect to those modalities. I
Mhm.
think when it comes to trauma, if we come from a place of authority, we are re-abusing our patients immediately because
Yes.
they have a very weird
Yeah.
rapport to the authority.
Mm-hmm. And the implication is that we are better than,
Yeah.
and that we, that we are not wounded, that we are superior in our health.
Yeah.
And when I presented at the conference the other day, I was so excited about the response that I got, because the audience, clinicians, were excited and applauding me for telling my pieces of my story, because that wasn't their norm. And so if I can get that back from clinicians, and ultimately me telling my story, you telling your story, gives them permission to be able to use that, not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the client.
For the benefit of the client. This is so central. So
Mhm.
this is also, there is a cleverness and intelligence of storytelling, and I think that's our responsibility, is to be clever here and to help the other through what I can bring to them.
Yeah.
And that's not given. It requires practice.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have overshared in last session. I need to be more selective, and we learn on the job.
Learn on
here.
the job. Yeah.
And it's also because it's attachment. Whatever I do depends on the other as well, because it's transactional. It's a dyad, as you said rightly.
Mhm.
And remember maybe this paper from the Boston group of, I have a blank now. Anyway, it's called the Something More in Psychodynamic, 1999 or something. Anyway, what they say is that interpretation in psychodynamic psychoanalysis is great, blah blah blah, but there is something that we'll never conceptualize and quantify, by the way, which is the something more. 30% of communication is verbal. I'm using my hands now. We're making eye contact.
Right.
That's the 70%.
Yeah.
The something more is where we can heal the trauma, probably.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so, what do you need from me? Yeah.
Well, I need you to be here at iCAAD. No, what I need from you is to be heard, because no one at home ever heard the little Christophe.
No.
No one at home ever heard me.
Yeah.
And anyone hearing me without telling me with this finger, you need to, is welcome into my life.
Yeah.
And I got that from people I never expected, called the therapist I came across, and some friends as well. It opened me to a new world.
Yeah.
The planet trauma became a kind of warm and nice planet Earth all of a sudden.
Yes.
So, Judy, I'm really looking forward to be with you in May with Tom. I know Tom as well, and Tom is Judy's son. You mentioned he's essential in the diet
Yes.
you're proposing together. I cannot wait to be there. And I promise anyone who's thinking about joining your workshop that we basically scratched the surface in the last half an hour. It's a great moment. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm excited for the opportunity. I love iCAAD. It's just an extraordinary opportunity to be with my fellows, and I get fed there. Go to meetings in the morning, and I'm surrounded by people who understand where I'm coming from and what I might need in that moment. You know.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the compliment, and that's what we're trying to do, Sam and myself. Thank you so much. I'll see you in May then.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.